And there's a lot of emotions to the closure, right? And then it's how do you stagger the announcement from your team to the people? And sometimes the way you envision the closure doesn't really happen, and that's what happened to me. I was like, okay, I felt like I had decent dialogue with the team. They understood kind of where I was. And, I was really trying to work hard. I even, the year prior announced that I was going to try to sell. Right. So they kind of knew I was already trying to figure out a path. And then when I announced it first to my GM, it was hard. Right. She was very emotional. And, then it was like, how do we tell the team and how do we pick the right date? I had a date in mind that was a little bit later. And then it was like, well, looking at scheduling and staffing, like, we were already having a lot of like team turnover. So we were already
Yeah.
super lean on people. So we're like, and we just hired 2 or 3 coaches to try to build the bench per se. And we knew as soon as we announced it, those new coaches were going to leave. Right. So we're like, all right, let's bump it up a week. And I was like, well, maybe there'll be some camaraderie, people will understand. And really quickly it was people didn't quite understand, right? They were more upset about losing their home, losing their home gym. And cancellations start coming right away, thinking, oh, people will stay with me until the end. And they wanted cancels and credits. And it was really hard emotionally, right? To be like, you feel like you're the one making that decision to close and you're letting people down and people thinking you're the bad guy. And the reality is
Mm.
they don't understand everything it took for the 2 years that we were in place, right? To get there. So it was the closing was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think I had the same realization. I was only a couple months ahead of you on that front. And I take the team when I told the team, they took it reasonably well. But again, they're kind of there's this. It's sad. There's a little bit of this anger almost. I felt
Yep.
like there's this like resentment towards me, and you're like, and you're thinking to yourself, you have no idea how much emotionally, physically, financially put into this. And that was a tough pill to swallow. And yeah, to your point, like the cancellations start coming in, and you're just like, I thought we had a good community, and some people reached out and were sad because this was like had changed their life.
Yep.
But then others were like, oh, I'm doing a week, don't charge me even though it's prorate, because I was gonna I think like you did too, you
Yeah.
prorate everybody's memberships and stuff. And yeah, it was tough. That that was tough. And now on the other side, I just kind of feel like that weight has lifted. I noticed for me, I no longer had like the 4:30 a.m. I wake up pretty early, anywhere between 4 and 5:30 anyway, but like when I was had the gym, I would wake up at like 4:30 every day, just waiting for a text if I was like if I wasn't working out, waiting for a text from the coach, like not going to make it. And I was going to have to rush over to the studio and like open up. And that was like, I think for me, one of the, like, once I realized like I didn't have that stress all of a sudden, that was nice to kind of
Yeah.
move on from that.
And I don't know what your communication platform was, but we utilize Slack, right, as like team communication. And that Slack messaging was going off all day, every day, right? So, and again, just like you, I was waiting for the person to have to call off, right? Or hey, if we had one coach in the morning, that person, didn't, maybe they got sick or there was a family emergency, something came up and we had to adjust schedules and we had to coordinate everything, or the technology didn't work, right? Oh, the Wi-Fi's out, or this TV's not working, all the things. And it was just nonstop. Or it was maybe there was a piece of equipment that broke, or someone that got hurt, or someone that wants to cancel. So the Slack notifications was just nonstop in this type of business. So that was one of the biggest things too, was that noise subsided, which was nice on top of our day jobs, right? Like, I mean, people don't some people understood, right? We were still working corporate, right? We were told the dream that we could do this semi absentee and we could kind of build our business and eventually, maybe look for an exit. But there is no semi absentee, especially with one single unit economics, because you only have one leader and you have one team. If you were maybe to open up a few of these, you probably have the bandwidth and the bench to do it. But when you got one location, everything comes back to you as the ultimate decision maker.
Mm, mm, yeah. Talk to me a little bit about your corporate. I know you're very senior within your organization, but talk to me a little bit about like the work you do and then what led you into franchising.
Yeah, so I've been in medical device sales and leadership for the last, call it 20 years. Carrying a bag, leadership, commercialization, channel partner expansion, and ultimately now leading a national sales team for a medical technology organization. So I've always been, someone that enjoys the hustle, enjoys the build, enjoys seeing things from different lenses. That's something that's always carried in me, even as early age. I was always into, business ownership and going door to door, selling, Easter eggs, selling candy out of my locker as in high school and middle school, right? I was the one that was looking for something to do. I started actually an online frisbee golf, in college, so I did that. Sold frisbee golfs online as one early venture. Then I did transdermal energy patches. So I went into a venture of doing transdermal energy patches on my own. I read the book, The 4 Hour Work Week from Tim Ferriss back in the day, and just
Yeah,
got
yeah,
really amped up and excited. And literally was going to airports as I was traveling for work, looking at magazines, seeing what was hip, trying to find something that I could kind of create. And I found this transdermal patch kind of company. And I was like, wonder if I could do something like that. I drink energy drinks. Wonder if I could dabble in that. And literally from scratch, within kind of 3 months, I created a brand, created an LLC, sourced a product, started selling, and ultimately I got up to almost $100,000 in transdermal energy patches in a year. So and that was short lived, just because I couldn't really own the manufacturing process of it. The quality of the product really wasn't there, and I couldn't get a lot of residuals after the first batch of product I sold. So I kind of was, I was early. I think I was like 23, 24 years old. And I was like, all right, I probably not the right product, but learned a ton. From there, I said, hey, I'd love to really start getting into franchising as well. I'd love to, I've always had a passion for health and wellness. So I said, hey, what can I explore in that space? And actually in 2017, I was actually going to do a fitness concept, and at the time, and a growing brand. And just as I was doing some due diligence, the cost of construction, the retail space, the relationship and the dialogue I was having with the franchisor just didn't feel right. And I didn't have enough funds to really see it through because, obviously, we've now opened gyms. We understand the cost of it. So I was kind of seeing that early on as well, and decided not to move forward with it. But it was still, an itch of mine. And then back in 2019, I signed on for a stretch concept, and I build out again, still trying to acquire funds. I'm probably now, 28, 29 at that time. And I'm definitely someone that gets something in my mind and I just figure out a way to do it. And so I literally go in, I try to get approved for an SBA loan because, this concept probably was about 200, $300,000, cost to build out. And so I get approval to do the SBA loan, but I don't know if you utilized SBAs, but I did have to go through the process of that, and end up using essentially a K to like self fund this first studio because I wasn't
yeah.
getting the funds soon enough to open the doors. And so I only bought one unit because I didn't have the funds to buy multiple. But I said, hey, I can build this out. If I can get that one to be successful, I'll buy more. But by the time I built this out, it was actually COVID and freaked me out, which, we can talk about going through opening a business during COVID. But ultimately, after restrictions were lifted, I was able to reopen and get the business back to cash flow and then profitability. By the time I was ready to open up another one, no additional units around me were available. They were already sold. And so I said, okay, great. Let me just kind of continue to operate it. I'd reached out to some local franchisors near me, was able to sell the one unit just to kind of, okay, let me figure out what I want to do next. Then I find the strength and conditioning concept a few years later because the same company acquires it, and it's looked like it was a nice shiny gym, right? It looked really exciting. It had the technology, it had the strength, it had the conditioning, all the things I was looking for in the fitness concept. And I said, hey, I've done this once, let me do it again. And then the goals this time was to have enough, right, to do the 3 to 5 and expand, get into early, and really think I was going to take that path because it was always something I was passionate about. I wanted to build something in my town. So I actually opened the first location in the town I lived in because I wanted to build that community as well, because it was something that was special to me. I wanted to build friendships and bonds and really try to build something special in the town I live in. So that's how I got there. Ultimately just something I've always been passionate about. I enjoy the grind. I enjoy the hustle, and that's always been part of my DNA.
Yeah. That's great, man. There's certainly no shortage of hustle and grind when you're operating these businesses.
Yeah.
I think well, I mean, there's so many interesting steps along the way, just kind of like your entrepreneurial journey and having that you typically like on a top of a corporate job. Like to me, that's not something you do because like because someone tells you. That is something like you are drawn into doing.
Yeah.
After you clock out for the day, you're back on for your second shift, which is we'll get into that. Can you talk to me a little bit about, well, I guess probably I have a lot of questions here. So franchising, the first concept, the stretch concept,
Yep.
what attracted you to that, and kind of where was the brand in its journey at that time? Because that seemed like it had actually gone reasonably well, aside from the opening in COVID, which is the
Yeah.
next piece I want to talk about. But like, what got you into it? What was exciting about it?
Yeah. So when I was evaluating, again, I was thinking health and wellness because I've always been passionate about, sports, athletics, enjoy working out myself. And I just, one, the brands, as I started getting additional funds to kind of build out a gym, most of the brands were already sold out in your market. Right. And then, when you looked at new brands, they may just didn't resonate with me. Then one of my friends who was a trainer started working for this concept, and part of the process in this kind of pre-sale, it's you get coaches, you kind of do pop-ups, you do all these things. And so this individual starts marketing like, hey, I'm going to be at this place offering free stretches. And I said, oh, that's really a need. No one's really offering stretch at this time, because it's called 2018, 2019. I've seen, some trainers offer it here and there, but nothing dedicated to it. And I said, I'm feeling kind of stiff. I'm getting a little bit older. And, I'm like, let me go try it out. And it was probably this got 30 minutes away from where I live. I go do a demo, and I was like, this is actually really great. I feel like I need
Yeah.
this. And, at the time it's, 30 minutes away. So I buy just a punch pass so I could utilize it. I said, well, I wonder if I can get one of these locally. And so I reach out to the brand, start going through the due diligence. And then at the time, someone was in line ahead of me that was looking at the territory in my hometown. So I go through the process and ultimately get one that's kind of 20 minutes away from me, a little bit closer than the other location, but that's the territory I buy. But that's how I got introduced to it. It was early in the brand. At the time, there was only one open near me, and there was probably 15 total in the US, but also a lot of licenses sold. Not too far off where we were, but there was already people lined up to get licenses before me. And in this journey, right, you have to be in line, and you kind of go through a invitation day, and the people that go ahead of you get first rights of a reusal for a certain period of time. And they leverage
Yeah.
that period of time to get people to jump in, right? To kind of create that sense of urgency. So that's where the brand was. It was still relatively early. There was a lot of upside. There was no brand doing it, unlike fitness, right? Fitness is on every corner. So that's where the brand was at the time.
Okay. Yeah, it was a kind of a novel concept at the time. I guess you're talking 7, 8 years ago, almost at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
So, okay, that makes a ton of sense. And what's interesting is the the kind of inertia of you hear licenses sold. Somehow that becomes a good like, oh, these things are expensive. It's other smart people buying them. This is probably like something real. And and then there's also I know the franchisor, kind of this halo effect because they're, one of the biggest, and they've had, demonstrated tons of success over the years, and you kind of hope that translates. So you go in, you buy it, it's a great concept, which, turns out it certainly was. sign your lease. When did you sign your lease? When were you supposed to open? And talk to me about opening a wellness in-person brick and mortar store during COVID.
Yeah, so I probably signed my lease in, let's call it early 2018. Uh, with this concept, there's not a lot of build out, right? If you get a vanilla shell, you open the thing in 2 months. 1,000 square feet. Essentially, it's just equipment delivery, painting some walls, throwing some floors in. So the unit economics for it is much better, and you only need 90 to 100-ish people, right, to break even, and the fixed cost is the trainers, right? So that can slide. That unit economic is valuable and it costs you less to break even. But the challenge in it is, as you scale up, your margins kind of stay the same because you're not going to get the kind of margin improvement as you get more members, because that goes to your trainers, right? That's the sliding scale of your fixed cost. So that we start leases kind of build out, let's call it middle of 2018. My intent was to open at the end of 2019, because this is going into COVID, right? So middle of 2019, build out, and I open the just soft open January of 2020. So we start hearing about COVID, right? So I think I
Yeah.
opened with about 150 members in pre-sale. I was going to be cash flowing month one, and we open January, people start talking, well, have you heard about this COVID? And, is it going to be an issue? And we're like, oh, no, it's just kind of like the flu and it'll be fine. But we start getting nervous. And then they finally announce the closure, right? The mandate, the 2 weeks to stop the spread. And that's when I really got nervous, right? Because we ultimately ended up having to close for probably about 2 months as they were trying to navigate. We tried to do the virtual adjustments. But with the stretch concept, that's one on one. You get a lot of people that don't, they're not going to pay, to do virtual. So we just kind of do it to keep people engaged. I try to keep my team engaged as well, because now they're trying to figure out what to do. So we kind of go through the first, call it 2 months afterwards, and I'm like, I don't know how many people are going to come back. So we open, we have pre-sale about 150. We say, hey, we're about to reopen. Here's the guidelines we're going to follow. We're going to mask. We're going to do all those things. Of the 150, call it 90 of them come back, right, to try
Yeah.
it, and because they also have there's a group of people that were eager to get out. Then there was a group of people that weren't, and
Mhm.
some of those people never even came back after the vaccine and all the things that came out. So we luckily, again, based on the break even, I'm able to break even with those 90 people that do decide to come back, because my labor was able to shift down. We were able to handle some compensation breaks, because obviously we had to kind of let people go, per se, outside of the ones that were working hourly, to do some things because we didn't need anything. But the one of the biggest challenges in that was when they had all the COVID funds, they required businesses to be operating for at least, like, I think it was like 6 months or a year. And since I wasn't, like, I couldn't even get any funds to like pay my team or anything like that. Whereas if you had, 1 year of operation, the government gave you, hey, we're going to give you, funds to pay your people, the payroll, act that they had at the time to kind of keep funds going. But
Nice.
without the proper documentation, I got no funding at all. So that was the scary part, was, hey, how am I going to do? How am I going to reopen if I'm not going to get any funding? Luckily, with those, when they were lifted, we were able to reopen, and enough people came back that it helped support us. And we just, and ultimately, with the landlord, added the 2 months to the end of the lease at that time. So that was the way we kind of got through not having to pay rent. But like I shared with you early, I ended up liquidating. I did the SBA ROBS loan at the time, where I was able
Mhm.
to roll over my K into a C corp and then use those funds. So I was essentially running on fumes now at that point, because I utilized my cash. I rolled over my K. So I essentially needed all the funds I could to keep going. And luckily, enough people came back that I didn't have to, go into bankruptcy or anything like that. It could have really been devastating.
Yeah. Wow. That's, you know, pe- people talk about, there's recessions or shifts in markets, and businesses lose 20, 30, 40% of their revenue. But no one fully appreciates, unless you're in fitness, how drastic it was to go to zero, especially for you. I mean, you had been open for a month,
Yep.
6 weeks maybe before that. Oh my gosh. So you reopened, were just managing a really tough situation and being smart, making shrewd, hard, difficult business decisions with staff and things like that. You're able to get your costs in line where you reopened and you were able to serve your members, serve your community, and come out profitable. And so that was, and then there was probably this nice uptick, hopefully for kind of the next. How long did you end up owning the concept, the studio?
Through end of 21, so another 2 years,
Okay.
right? So I kind of closed for the 2 months, operated it for 2 years, and then sold it at the end of 2021 or early 22. Yeah.
Okay. So, and then what kind of led you to sell it? Maybe it was a territory thing. What led you to sell that, and then kind of moving into the next concept?
Yeah, the sale really was I had one unit. It wasn't going to be enough for me to kind of leave my corporate career per se, right? And the unit economics were fine. You're not, depending on your cost of living, it's going to pay for some of it for me, right? So it was to me it was okay if I can't expand, I'm stuck with one unit. Is it worth it at the end of the day? And that was the question I had. And I said, you know what? This is probably more value for someone that has two or three already open than it is for me running the one. And in order for me to get another one, I'd have to buy a territory that just wasn't even close to me. So, and I was driving again 20, 25 minutes when I had to cover shifts or support. Again, this was one on one stretching. So I couldn't fill in as a, what we called, the specialist that were handling the stretching. But so I could only really help the front desk type work. So I said, you know what? Let me see if people are interested. There was a group that was expanding into the market. They were opening territories, locations, and that's what they were interested. We did some due diligence over 6 months to a year. So even when you put something for sale, it doesn't happen quick. It takes a lot of effort of finding the right people, a lot of due diligence, and ultimately we made that exit to the group that was expanding their territory. So that's really why it was just one unit didn't make sense, and I wanted to figure out what I would do next. And if I was going to do brick and mortar again, I wanted to make sure I had enough territories to support it. Took a break and started doing some short term rentals. So I had short term rentals out in Arizona, doing essentially people that were traveling for work for 1 to 3 months. So I started doing that, and then ultimately transitioned into another strength and conditioning concept.
Are you able to talk about the EBITDA multiple that you achieved when you sold the business?
Yeah. So, at the time too, I think, I'm turning 30. I don't, I'm not, well versed in business sales. And so I just kind of look up and I do some research. Ultimately, I sold it at X the EBITDA. And that's where I landed. Could I have gotten more? Probably if I kind of would have marketed it appropriately or, was more patient. When you're selling a business, doesn't matter what, there's sometimes sense of urgency, right? In a way, when you're like, okay, I'm going to sell this, you kind of get excited about it, and if you're not patient, you may lose some of that top line revenue. But ultimately, depends on how quickly you want to move. And I was kind of ready to go do something else as well, and so sometimes patience in a sale can lead to more value if you're willing to wait. So it just really depends on timing.
Yeah, particularly with brick and mortar, even at a GM, you're still probably doing kind of a lot of work. And so there's typically some type of discount applied, to that single location.
Yep.
They don't scale as well. Typically, when you've got multiple locations, GM running it, you're really more of an owner than in a business. You'll see those higher multiples.
Yep.
What kind of diligence did you do on the strength and conditioning concept before going in?
So, from my lens, right, I was familiar with the brand. I was familiar with the process. I always hear about people struggling. I thought it was more of a them problem. than a brand problem because I've done this before. I have the expertise, so that's where I was at the time. There was really one studio open, so it's not like I could have reached out to a bunch of people about it. And I was more looking at the concept and what was happening overseas, and the number of locations and the look and feel, and just getting excited about bringing that to my town, and that's the way I would like to train. And so my diligence was kind of minimal because I was like, I've done this before. I can do this again. Not an
Yep.
issue. And obviously, I reviewed the documents. I looked at the franchise agreement similar to the one I had before. And that was kind of it, right? I didn't spend a ton of time on it because I've done it before. I can do it again.
Well, and so much of these businesses you think revolves around just the execution. And here you are, you're successful, sales professional. Then you have built a brick and mortar wellness concept from, early, that was an early brand and you did, excelled there, done well. And then this has very similar traits. It's admittedly a new brand to the US by the same, by a, reputable brand, and you've done it before. So yeah, I would have done the same thing. You probably just, the workouts look great. There's really nice marketing here. And I think, yeah, I could easily see how that happens. And again, to me, the biggest thing is like, is you've done it before. So you, you bought three licenses, was
Yeah.
it?
So essentially, I won't go too much into detail, but the way that they structured the state I'm in, they could only release one, but I had rights to purchase before someone else did. So my intent was to do 3 to 5. Luckily, I didn't have to pay for all of them up front, which saved me in the end. But I had a right to the additional locations that I was looking at prior to anyone because of my prior relationship with them and where they were with the current state at the time. So good and bad. But yeah, so my plan was to do 3 to 5, and luckily I didn't have to pay for it all up front.
Yeah. So with the location you ended up opening up, can you talk to me about the kind of your soft open process and kind of how things started kind of panned out from, kind of when you signed your lease to kind of through opening and what that was like?
Yeah, so you know, I came in thinking it was going to run me about 350-ish thousand, right, total that can open. That was my initial projections of how much I was going to put into the location. I get my lease signed in January of 2023. I jump straight into pre-sale, right? Kind of go, hey, once you get your lease signed, you're running. So I already kind of had my GM lined up. We start pre-sale right away. My contractor says, hey, I can get this thing open to you by May. We start submitting our permits. That was a retail space that originally was one big retail store that they were going to subdivide. So I was needing the landlord to do a little bit of work before I got in. Landlord said, hey, they'd have it to us by the April, and that we could start work. So we would hit that May deadline. So I jumped straight into pre-sale, grassroots events, hire a GM, hire a head coach. We start, getting out to the community. Any event I could, anything I could sponsor. I start doing marketing ads, and I start running. We start creating, really good buzz around the gym. People are talking about it. They're excited for it to come. We start getting some early memberships, and then all of a sudden, April comes and the landlord hasn't even started their work yet. May comes, landlord hasn't started their work yet. And ultimately, the landlord work doesn't get completed until August, right? So I originally started thinking I'm going to start, open gym in May. I'm going to start generating revenue. I don't ultimately open the studio until November because I don't get the returned work until August, and then October. September, October was my general contractor stayed on time. It took him 2 months, so he did meet his obligations, and but it took a lot of time to get through the the landlord's work, which was really difficult to communicate. They weren't getting back to you. There wasn't a sense of urgency like I had. So that's where I am. I end up probably about 100-ish members through that. We probably would have had some more if the delays didn't happen, because once you start hitting your timelines, people end up joining other gyms and then they
Mhm.
decide not to move forward. So I end up with about 100 members going into my soft open. And once you get to your soft open, the energy starts to subside, right? You kind of, you pre-sale is the most critical time for a gym, because you need to have full studios and full classes as you open to create that hype and to create that sense of energy. Because if you open with not many members, or you're opening with just limited people in classes, that energy and that excitement, especially in group fitness,
Of
really starts
course.
to subside. And then after that point, I never ever got back to a lead flow like I did during pre-sale. So that's where I kind of landed to from a soft open perspective. And really the biggest cash drain for me was continuing to operate the business from a marketing ad fund, from a payroll fund, everything that it costs to keep that pre-sale engine on. And if you don't time that correctly, it could really, really put you behind when you open any type of business. So that's probably a critical component in your open.
Yeah, it's the pre-sale is such a tough concept to navigate because too long, which is what you experience, you're draining resources. You've got a GM, you're paying full-time salary, you're spending 1,500 to 1,500 bucks, $2,000 a month in ads plus agency fees, and that's going to drag on for 6, 8, 10 months. Or the other side of it is you wait until the construction crew gets in halfway through. And sometimes there's delays even on the permitting side, but 3 months certainly isn't enough for pre-sale either. So there's this really delicate balance between having enough time versus having it drag on versus having kind of the right amount of momentum. So you opened with around 100. What were the targets? What were kind of you expecting to hit? Were there surprises in kind of people's receptiveness? Because again, it sounds like you opened with about 100, or I think your stretch concept, you said it was around 150. I think this is you've done this before. It seems like kind of an uphill battle almost. Despite there's obviously the landlord piece of it, but was there anything else that just made it more challenging?
Yeah, so I think yeah, so under where I thought I'd be, I thought for sure I would at minimum get to 150, 200. By the time I opened, that was my projections. And the biggest challenges were, versus the other concept I had, there's more places to do it. So people weren't as eager to jump in. They said, I'll just wait till you open so I can try it, right? I need to really try. They need to like feel and sense the product. And with the other concept, you could test and feel the product with the pop-up, a demo. It just wasn't in the space. With ours, you couldn't really test it. You can try to do outdoor workouts, you could try to utilize other venues, but you weren't getting the experience that you would deliver in the space. So that made it harder for people to sign up ahead of time. They wanted to feel it in the space. The other challenge was when consumers believe you're going to open next month, they would rather wait for you to open, right? Because you get to this period where, the offer, the low cost offer maybe is gone because you hit a certain benchmark, or eventually that cost just isn't create enough value for them to sign up months early. And then you get to the point where, oh, you're about to open next month. I'll just wait, right? Like it's not worth that $20 a month savings to sign up as a pre-sale member. So creating your value proposition is extremely important. And whether that's price or incentives, whatever it may be, or even if there was a way to just get people to sign up at a really low rate that first month, right? So you have people that really fill that room when you open. It could be another approach to take, but our brand was very against the dollars, right? Like they would rather you sell at a higher rate and get lower members than try to get more members at a lower rate up front. So that was probably the biggest challenge is the experience. You had to actually feel it to sign up. Whereas the other concept, you could actually share that experience with them in a 15-minute demo stretch. And people were literally, if you got them on the table at that time, you give them one stretch, people would sign up. I mean, it was like clockwork. So as many people I can get on that demo bench, they would sign up. And you could then go to like brands, other fitness concepts, and it wasn't competitive anymore. So you could then
Hmm.
leverage the
Hmm.
current platforms to get people to try it and they would sign up.
I see. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times we were doing, when I was in my pre-sale, you'd be at a race or a farmer's market or wherever, and you're talking to people about the concept, and you're trying to explain it, and you get a pitch, you do it hundreds of times, you have a pretty good pitch, but they still can't quite conceptualize it because it really depends on where they are in their workout journey too. So
Yep.
I didn't even think about that, the fact that you could literally physically deliver the product with the stretch concept as opposed to
Yeah.
just kind of this whole this whole idea. Interesting. Um, just mindful of time. I've got maybe one or two questions on this, and I want to spend a few minutes on kind of what you're doing now, kind of
Yep.
post gym. But before we move to post gym, so you opened up. Yeah, I know you said you came in. Again, I experienced the same thing where you kind of lose that soft open, momentum, and we struggled too. We didn't hit enough members. Excuse me, when we opened up, and it was an uphill battle. So my sense is, and we've talked quite a bit over the years on this. And so when did you start to realize that maybe this might not work? Were you looking at like the unit economics? What was was there a tipping point where you're like, this might not work, and then your decision to kind of shut down?
Yeah. So I kind of knew right away, as
Uh,
soon as, yeah,
okay,
yeah, as
just
soon as
wait.
I,
It took me too long. It took me too long.
yeah. So as soon as I opened and I landed at 100, and then I started seeing what the first few months looked like, I knew that this was something was the model was broken, and I put the studio up for sale relatively early, and started consulting with the franchisor relatively early, and that's when so that yeah, I probably knew in the first 3 months that something was broken. I continued to invest, I continued to work on it, but I knew relatively early that I wasn't going to get to a place that would offset this cost with the amount of capital I put in, right? I think if someone could have bought this from me and I was kind of offering it at a discount, with less capital you can make it work, but with the amount of capital that the early owners had to put in, it was not going to get there. And if we ever got there, it's, essentially you're running your whole 10-year cycle to finally get your funds back. So I knew relatively early.
Yeah. Talk about the investment. So obviously you had this really big operational overhead for a very long time. Again, from your pre-sale, you had full-time employee, your GM was full-time, you had a head coach, which was, I
Yeah.
don't know if was your head coach full-time also or
They were
part.
hourly. Yeah.
Okay. Plus the ad spend for a pretty lengthy time. What about the build out cost? I know I think you said you'd budgeted about 350 for it. Where did you land in that? Where was your actuals relative to kind of your estimate?
Yeah, well, I no, I thought I was going to spend 350 for the total project, including equipment. That's where I thought I was going to land. And my initial construction cost was wasn't horrible. We were estimating it was going to cost about 100 grand to do the build out initially, and then it ended up landing at about 250 from a construction standpoint. So, over 2x what I was going to budget, primarily because of some sound attenuation concerns that
Mm.
came up during construction that delayed some of the build out, but also added a ton of expense. There was an unknown basement that was underneath part of the studio that added some additional expense. So that's kind of where we landed from a construction standpoint.
Okay. How much is the the sound attenuation stuff costs? Because thankfully I didn't have to do it. I was in an end cap, and
Yeah.
we didn't have to do it. But what is that? Right? Isn't it like another like 50 to 70 grand?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably almost 100 additional because we ended up having to do, the walls were essentially 3 layers of drywall and sheetrock and sound attenuation. Then we were going to do a drop ceiling, but the landlord pushed back. We had to do a double layered drywall ceiling, which then the general contractors had to climb through these like, pillars essentially to get like the way to get hooked up in the system appropriately, which caused a ton of expense. So it was probably 70 to 100 of the additional funds just to sound attenuation that most people don't realize until you get into it, or you
Yeah.
realize too late because you open and then your neighbors are complaining.
Neither one of those scenarios is a good one. So okay, and I know we kind of talked about the closure kind of at the top. You had I'd say the wherewithal again, probably because your experience, the wherewithal, knowing that it wasn't going to work. So that was when did you close, and what have you been up to kind of since then?
Yeah, so it closed in September 2025. One of the biggest insights is, have honest communication with your landlord. If you're having challenges, the sooner you start that dialogue, the better.
Mhm.
Um, because it takes time for them to find people. You can work on a mutual agreed plan if it's more of a cash flow and you want to do it long term. Maybe there's levers you can pull. If you're not going to sustain, like have dialogues with them and work with them. I feel like waiting too long will hurt you and cost you as well. So, that's one recommendation to the people is, have the dialogue, be transparent, like work on partnership. Like most landlords, depending on your landlord, they're willing to have a dialogue and understand where you're at because they don't want to lose you or they want to make sure someone's filling that space. So have that dialogue early. So I closed in September 2025. And then now just focused on family first, right? It took a lot of energy away from the family, and I think like just like you had a recent a child at the same time of opening, right? I got two,
Mhm.
my daughter's about to turn 2 in next month. So
Yeah,
through this
same.
whole time, yeah. So through this whole time, you're navigating this really difficult time while trying to enjoy the time with your wife and kids. So it was like, hey, like once this is done, like I need to just be there for them and really enjoy those moments. Continue to work on the corporate career. So I lead the medical device technology company. So focused on that, and then just I learned a lot, and I've built these businesses in the past. So just trying to share some of that messaging, and what I call the second shift is, being transparent in these because most people are only showing, hey, I opened a new studio, like look at it, it's really awesome, and all the great things about it, and I was guilty of that too, just trying to share the excitement around it, but no one talks about the other side, and no one talks about how lonely it really is when you're building these businesses. I mean, the sleepless nights, the thinking you're going to go bankrupt, like just thinking I've completely ruined my family, that's a thought that you live on your own inside of you, and you're really thinking you failed and you ruined not just your life but the people around you. And so, I was like, you know what, let me open up about that. Let me share my stories. Maybe people need guidance and mentorship or someone that they can relate with that's going through it because otherwise it's extremely lonely. And even with the messages I've put out there right now on the second shift, I'm getting like, 20, 30 messages from people that are in similar positions. Like, hey, how did you navigate this? How did this help? Like, like I had to close my restaurant. I had to close my gym, or hey, I like my first gym's doing good, my second gym isn't. And there's people out there that are seeking this help, and they need people that are honest and open about it. So that's what I'm doing at the second shift now, just sharing stories and trying to be there as a mentor or guidance for anyone that needs it.
That, that's great, man. And yeah, you hit it right on the head. It is lonely, and you carry those just that weight of feeling like you just ruined everything for a really long time until finally you come out on the other side and you're going, that sucked. Bruised but not broken. And what can I learn from it? And
Yeah.
sounds like you're doing that. So the second shift, that's where can people find you on that?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok is probably the primary places that I'm posting right now. It's just the underscore second underscore shift and then underscore. So that's where you'll find me. That's where I'm posting most of my content. And it's primarily around kind of three key areas. Business ownership. What does it take? If you have an idea, how do you take that idea into conception? And then essentially kind of commercial leadership. Like if you're in the corporate environment and you're looking to level up your career, how do you do that? So I provide insights around that, and then financial independence as well. So I kind of talk about investing. What do you need to do? Like what is it, and how do you utilize those funds to then fuel your second shift?
That's such a great name, and what I love about it is there is, and you've probably seen this too on social media. There's so many accounts out there where people just say, I'm going to start a coaching business or an investment business or something about teaching people how to grow a business. But you've been a corporate professional, you've climbed the ladder, you've owned multiple successful businesses yourself, you sold successful businesses. Probably the hardest lessons have come from the failures. And so you've got all the battle scars to actually talk about this intelligently and from real experience. So I love that, man. That's what a great concept. And I saw I saw some of your posts, and just so many of them just resonated with me so deeply already. So I'm excited to kind of see what you do there.
Yeah, you've lived it. I mean, you and I've lived it. We have definitely have some battle scars from it, but it's what do you do with it, right? Because it's really easy to sulk in the pain. You could take two directions and just say, "Man, I ruined it all. I lost all those funds. I lost $675,000. Opening a gym, and it didn't go the way I planned." So I could easily sulk in that, but instead, it's, hey, you know what? It happened. I learned, and now what am I going to do next? And my wife thinks I'm crazy, but it just takes one idea, and like you said it earlier, you're drawn to this. There's something that's pulling me to it, and no matter how much I try to play it safe or be conservative, it's an itch you have, and it's something that you strive for, and you're getting pulled to it every day, and it's the reality. And that's why I continue to do things and trying to evaluate what I do next. And maybe it's consulting, maybe it's coaching, probably not another brick and mortar. Probably done with that for the rest of my career, but there's a lot of opportunity out there.
Yeah, that's great, man. Well, Carlos, this has been a ton of fun. It's good to have a nice kind of just bow on the story, I guess, a little bit. Like I said, I know you and I have chatted a lot over the years because we opened our studios right around the same times.
Yeah. And we were probably on some of the same discovery calls and everything too. So
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I think we were on a discovery call,
yeah,
or very early in what mid 22, if I'm not mistaken, because I think I bought my licenses in end of 22. So yeah, that's right. I remember that too. So well, this has been fun, man. I wish you a ton of success in the new endeavor, and obviously we'll keep in touch. But really appreciate your time, man.
yeah, no, of course, yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right,
Take it
see ya.
easy, and good luck. I know you got the next part of your day starting.
Yeah, yeah, we'll keep going.
Yep.
All
All
right,
right,
see
man.
ya.
Take care.